There is a very strict rule in the ocean. If a killer whale wants to eat you, the killer whale will find a way to kill you, and then eat you. These animals will murder great white sharks, they will torture seals, and they will drown entire whales. But by some fortunate miracle, if you're a human, killer whales have no interest in you. In fact, in all of recorded history, there has never been a single fatal attack by an orca in the wild. In the wild. Killer whales have killed humans before, but not suddenly when humans were attacking it, not suddenly when humans first kidnapped them, but seemingly randomly, seemingly out of nowhere, only after the orca had gone insane. And when a 12,000 pound animal that hunts apex predators for fun finally decides that it does want to kill you, there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. So, what actually happens when the ocean's deadliest predator turns on us? And why in only these specific moments did these creatures decide to break the one rule they've always followed? If you think the answer is just, well, duh. Obviously there's no recorded wild attacks. How many humans are just going to be randomly swimming outside of a ship in the middle of the ocean where orcas live? There are surfers in Norway, kayakers in Canada, and deep sea divers all over the world who have had entire pods of wild orcas swim right up to them. And what happens? The orcas will swim over, use their echolocation to scan the person, maybe swim alongside them for a minute to check them out, and then they just leave. And no, it's not like they scanned the person and went, yikes, a human, retreat. They just completely lose interest. And it's definitely not out of fear. An adult orca weighs up to 12,000 pounds and swims at 35 miles per hour. If they wanted to eat a kayaker, the kayaker would be eaten. Simple as that. Wild orcas have every single chance in the world to kill us. Their refusal to do so is a deliberate choice. They know exactly what we are, and they actively choose to leave us alone, which makes the few times they did kill humans fundamentally wrong, because it means that something had to happen for them to break that rule. So where did it start? The first recorded fatal incident didn't happen in the open ocean. It happened in a concrete pool in Canada, at a place called Sealand of the Pacific in 1991. The first time an orca had killed a human, ever. A 20-year-old marine biology student and part-time trainer named Kelty Byrne was walking along the edge of the whale pool. She slipped, lost her footing, and fell into the water. Now, normally, if you fall into an animal enclosure, the animal either gets spooked and runs away, or it immediately attacks you. But the three orcas in this pool didn't do either of those things. Instead, one of them grabbed her by the foot and pulled her under. She managed to break the surface and scream for help, but before anyone could reach her, the whales dragged her back down. They began passing her between each other. They'd let her up just long enough to gasp for air, and then immediately submerge her again. This went on for over 10 minutes. They made absolutely zero attempt to actually eat her. They just prevented her from leaving until she eventually drowned. When you look at how wild orcas actually hunt, it's fast and incredibly efficient. But this was prolonged, chaotic, and completely unnatural. It was the behaviour of animals that had completely lost their minds. And at the very centre of this chaos was one specific whale. The whale that initially grabbed Kelty's foot was a massive male named Tilikum. And when I say massive, I mean, well, just look at him. He was just huge. Tilikum was the largest orca in captivity, eventually growing to over 22 feet long and weighing 12,000 pounds. He was captured off the coast of Iceland when he was just 2 years old, ripped away from his family, and eventually sold to Sealand. And the conditions he was kept in were horrifying. At night, he and the two female orcas were locked in a pitch black metal box barely large enough for them to turn around in, for up to 14 hours at a time. After the 1991 incident, Sealand of the Pacific essentially shut down. But you can't exactly just release a 12,000 pound animal that has been in captivity for years back into the wild. He wouldn't know how to survive. So Tilikum was sold and transferred to SeaWorld in Orlando. SeaWorld had bigger pools, better facilities, and a massive breeding program. They needed a large male to breed with their females, and Tilikum was exactly what they were looking for. They knew about his history, but they figured with better training and a larger environment, the aggression wouldn't be an issue. And for a few years, they were right. Surprisingly, Tilikum was actually behaving well again, until someone decided to break the rules. In 1999, a whopping 8 years after the first incident, a 27-year-old man named Daniel Dukes decided to stay at SeaWorld after the park closed. He evaded security, hid until the middle of the night, and for whatever reason, decided it would be a good idea to strip down to his underwear and jump into the orca tank, of the only orca that had already killed a human before. Which, not to spoil the story, was a phenomenally bad idea. The next morning, trainers arrived to find Dukes dead, draped over Tilikum's back. We don't know exactly what happened because there were no cameras and no witnesses, but the autopsy showed severe trauma, abrasions, and actual bite marks. Imagine being in that situation. You jump into a pitch black pool of freezing salt water. You can't see anything below the surface, and suddenly a 12,000-pound apex predator bumps into your leg. You can't swim faster than it. You can't fight it. You're completely helpless in the dark. It's genuinely one of the most terrifying ways a human being could possibly die. But this brings up a really interesting point. Tilikum killed this guy, and he clearly mangled him, but he didn't eat him. What is the orca even doing that makes this necessary? When wild orcas hunt, dragging things around and waiting for them to drown rarely happens. Take seals. When a seal is resting on a floating piece of ice, it thinks it's safe. But a pod of orcas will line up side to side, dive down, and swim perfectly in sync towards the ice to create a massive wave. The wave washes over the ice, knocks the seal into the water, and the orcas instantly grab it. Or look at how they hunt dolphins. Dolphins are incredibly fast and agile, so the orcas don't even bother trying to bite them during a chase. Instead, they speed up from below and ram the dolphins with their heads, or use their tails, which look like this. Yeah, getting hit by that's definitely going to leave a mark. They swat them out of the water like a baseball, which, as you can probably guess, doesn't feel great. The blunt force trauma instantly shatters the dolphin's spine. They do drown large whales sometimes, but with bigger whales weighing nearly 50 tons, their drowning strategy is necessary because they can't drag them around as easily. You, my tiny little Beyond the Blue viewer, do not weigh 50 tons, so you are a toy. If an orca actually wanted to eat a human, you'd be hit from below so hard that you'd be completely paralysed instantly, before you were swallowed in chunks. The captive deaths were brutal, yes, but they were incredibly sloppy compared to an orca's true hunting capability. This was pure frustration. But surely, after a trespasser died, SeaWorld would make absolutely sure that a highly trained professional would never be in danger, right? In 2010, the illusion that these animals were just friendly sea pandas completely shattered. Dawn Brancheau was one of SeaWorld's most experienced and respected trainers. She had worked with Tilikum for years. They were doing a routine Dine with Shamu show, where guests eat lunch while watching the whales perform right in front of them. Dawn was lying on the edge of the pool, interacting with Tilikum. And then, in broad daylight, in front of dozens of tourists, Tilikum grabbed her. Some reports say he grabbed her ponytail, others say her arm, but the result was the same. He pulled her into the water. Other trainers immediately rushed in to help, slamming the water and throwing food to distract him, but Tilikum completely ignored it. He dragged her to the bottom of the pool. He rammed her, held her under, and refused to let go. By the time they managed to trap him into a smaller medical pool and retrieve her body, it was far too late. She had suffered blunt force trauma, broken bones, and had drowned. This was a violent act against a professional who knew exactly what she was doing. But why? Why did Tilikum do this? Orcas are mammals with some of the most complex brains on the planet. They actually have a part of the brain called the paralimbic cleft, which humans don't even have. Scientists believe this area is dedicated to, well, feeling things. Basically, they process emotions on a level that we can't even comprehend. In the wild, orcas live in incredibly tight-knit family groups. They stay with their mothers for their entire lives. They have their own distinct languages, or really, entirely different cultures, and they swim up to 100 miles every single day. Now, imagine taking an animal with that level of emotional intelligence and physical need and dropping it into a concrete box. Tilikum was being psychologically tortured. In the wild, male orcas are usually protected by their mothers. But in captivity, Tilikum was thrown into pools with dominant females who weren't related to him. Because there was no space for him to swim away, the females would constantly bully him. They'd use their teeth to scrape his skin, a behaviour called raking, leaving him covered in bleeding scratches. He spent hours floating completely motionless at the surface of his tiny pool, a behaviour you literally never see in wild orcas. This violence was purely an unnatural symptom of captivity. If you lock a highly intelligent creature in a bathroom for 30 years and let it get beaten up by its roommates, eventually, it's going to lose its mind. But after these incidents, the PR teams completely ignored the obvious psychosis. Instead, they spun a completely different story. They called it playing. Whenever these incidents happen, there was always a massive effort to spin the narrative. The official statements would often suggest that the whale was just playing too rough, that they didn't know their own strength, that Tilikum was just curious and didn't realise that humans can't hold their breath for 20 minutes. As if a highly intelligent apex predator was just sitting there going,
"Oops, my bad, I thought you had gills."
This is completely ignoring the reality of this animal. Orcas are incredibly precise creatures. If an orca wants to gently take a fish out of your hand without touching your fingers, it can do that perfectly. It knows exactly how fragile we are. During these attacks, the whales actively ignored standard recall comments. In SeaWorld, if a trainer slaps the water or uses a specific underwater tone, the whales are heavily trained to immediately stop what they're doing and return to the edge of the pool for a fish. When Tilikum had Dawn in the water, trainers were giving him every single recall signal in the book. He knew exactly what they meant. He knew he would get a reward if he stopped. He actively chose to ignore them. While we can sympathise with the psychological damage the whales suffered, we cannot sugarcoat the danger. Their actions were completely intentional. They were taking out their frustrations on the only thing in the tank they could actually control. You might be thinking, okay, Tilikum was just a broken whale. He was an isolated incident. And to be fair, it almost seems true. Because this one orca, Tilikum, was responsible for 3 out of the 4 total human deaths ever. 75% of the kills by one singular orca is pretty high. But that, of course, means there's another one. The idea that Tilikum was just one bad apple completely falls apart when you look at other captive orcas around the world. In 2009, just 2 months before Dawn Brancheau was killed, there was another fatal incident in Spain, at a marine park called Loro Park. A 29-year-old trainer called Alexis Martinez was in the water practicing for a Christmas show with an orca called Quito. Quito was actually born in captivity at SeaWorld and later shipped to Spain. He had never lived in the ocean. During the practice, Quito started acting erratically. He failed to perform several behaviours and began positioning himself between Alexis and the edge of the pool, blocking the trainer's escape route. Then, Quito charged. He rammed Alexis in the chest with his rostrum. And if you're wondering what that is, it looks like this. It's basically just solid bone. When Alexis's body was recovered, the autopsy showed massive internal bleeding, a crushed ribcage, and severe damage to his vital organs. Quito hit him with the pure intention of doing actual damage. This proved that the aggression was a completely systematic issue. Any orca, regardless of whether it was caught in the wild or born in a tank, can snap if pushed to the brink by an artificial environment. And these are just the times someone actually died. What about the times they almost did? For every fatal attack that made the news, there were dozens of terrifying close calls that the public rarely ever saw. One of the most chilling incidents happened in 2006, and it was actually caught on tape. A veteran trainer called Ken Peters was performing in the water with a female orca called Casata. Suddenly, Casata grabbed Ken by the foot, and she pulled him straight down to the bottom of the 36-foot deep pool. She held him pinned to the floor of the tank for nearly a minute. Ken, being an absolute professional, didn't panic. He held his breath and didn't struggle, knowing that fighting back would only make her bite down harder. She brought him up for air, let him take a breath, and then instantly dragged him down to the bottom again. Casata was completely in control, and she was letting Ken know that his life was entirely in her hands. Eventually, she brought him to the surface near the edge of the pool, and he managed to scramble out, suffering broken bones in his foot but surviving. When you look at the logs of these marine parks, there are hundreds of incident reports of whales lunging at trainers, pinning them against walls, or refusing to let them out of the water. The few fatalities we know about are really just the tip of the iceberg. The aggression in captivity was actually a constant threat. Trainers were just incredibly lucky to survive the other encounters. So captivity makes them violent, but wild orcas get stressed too. So why don't they ever snap on us? It's easy to say captivity stresses them out, but let's be real. The open ocean isn't exactly a relaxing spa. It's actually pretty terrible for literally everything living in it. Wild orcas deal with immense stress every single day. They face starvation when fish populations drop. They have to deal with noise pollution from cargo ships that completely ruins their ability to see underwater. They have to fight off other predators, protect their calves, and survive in freezing conditions. So if stress is a trigger for violence, why aren't wild orcas drowning surfers out of frustration? The difference comes down to one simple thing: space. In the wild, if an orca gets stressed, annoyed, or gets into a fight with another member of its pod, it can just swim away. It can put 5 miles between itself and the problem in a matter of minutes. They also have their families to rely on for social support. In a concrete tank, there's nowhere to go. If another whale is attacking you, you just have to sit there and take it. If the crowd noise is stressing you out, you can't dive deep enough to escape it. Violence against humans is a behaviour created entirely by concrete walls. Stress alone leaves us completely safe. But trapping them in a box changes everything. So wild orcas don't attack us. They never have. Except, recently, things have started to get a little weird off the coast of Spain. Just when we thought we had wild orcas completely figured out, things changed. Starting around 2020, a specific population of orcas off the coast of Spain started doing something completely unprecedented. They started attacking yachts. These orcas were actively coordinating to physically sink sailboats. Wait, are wild orcas finally attacking us? Did they finally realise that we're the ones ruining their ocean? Well, not exactly. When you look at how they're attacking these boats, they're specifically targeting the rudders. They swim up to the back of a sailboat, ram the rudder until it physically snaps off, spin the boat around a few times, and then they just leave. And in the cases where the boats actually took on water and sank, forcing the human crews to abandon ship and float in life rafts on the open water, the orcas completely ignored the humans. Even when they're literally destroying our property and sinking our ships, they still maintain their absolute rule of not touching people in the water. They know the difference between a piece of fiberglass and a living human, and they still choose to only break the fiberglass. But this raises a terrifying question. If they can teach each other to sink boats, what else could they teach each other? One of the most fascinating things about orcas is that they have actual culture. They actually teach each other things. Different pods have entirely different hunting strategies that are passed down from generation to generation. They even have cultural fads. Back in the 1980s, one female orca in the Pacific Northwest started swimming around with a dead salmon balanced on her head like a hat. Which sounds like a complete joke, but it's a 100% real, documented thing. Within a few weeks, orcas from completely different pods were all wearing dead salmon on their heads. And then, a few months later, the trend just died out and they never did it again. They're capable of learning new behaviours and spreading them rapidly through their society. Which means, if the Iberian orcas taught each other that breaking boat rudders is fun, could a pod theoretically teach each other to hunt humans out of revenge? Biologically, yes. If one dominant female decided that humans were prey and she taught her calves how to hunt us, then well, we'd be completely screwed. If it became a cultural trend for orcas to hunt humans, we'd literally never be able to swim near these guys again. The fact that they could easily wipe us out of the water, but actively choose not to, just goes to show how strict their social rules are. We only survive in their environment because they allow us to. Thankfully, they haven't taught each other to hunt us. But back in the human world, the damage was already done. The death of Dawn Brancheau in 2010 was the absolute breaking point for keeping killer whales in captivity. It sparked massive investigations, safety violations, and eventually the release of the 2013 documentary Blackfish. The documentary exposed the reality of Tilikum's life, the psychological damage of captivity, and the cover-ups of the near misses. And the public backlash was devastating. Attendance at marine parks plummeted. Corporate sponsors pulled their funding. People were no longer looking at whales as happy performers, they were looking at them as prisoners. This pressure became so massive that in 2016, SeaWorld officially announced they were completely ending their orca breeding program. The orcas currently in their parks will be the last generation to ever live in SeaWorld tanks. Tilikum himself died in 2017 from a bacterial infection after spending 33 years in a concrete pool. His death essentially marked the beginning of the end for captive orcas. So after all the attacks, the sunken boats, and the tragic deaths in captivity, who is actually the real threat here? When you look back at the history of humans and killer whales, the takeaway is actually incredibly simple. In the wild, they're at the very top of the food chain, but despite all of that power, they have shown us nothing but restraint. The only time these animals have ever crossed the line and killed a human being, it was because we put them in a situation where they couldn't be wild animals anymore. The title killer whale is definitely earned in the ocean, but there's a reason we don't call them killer human. Let's keep it that way. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Please leave some suggestions in the comments for future videos, because I really do read through them to see what you guys want me to cover next. And if you want to see our video about an animal that actually does actively hunt humans, you can check it out here. And if you haven't seen my second channel yet, Beyond the Green, make sure to check the link in the description for similar stuff just outside the water.